Welcome to the Next Level Guy Show podcast. I'm Ian, and this is where men rebuild discipline, confidence, and take control of their lives. No hype, no excuses, just real conversations and practical tools. Let's get into today's episode. What if the habits ruining your life aren't the real problem? For years, Tom blamed the drinking, gambling, porn, failed relationships, and reckless behaviour. But underneath it all, something was far deeper. A man who didn't believe he was enough. The uncomfortable truth? Tom knew something wasn't right for years. He knew he wasn't happy. He knew the behaviours weren't helping. He knew he wanted more from life. But awareness alone is never enough to change yourself. Meet Tom Jenkins, author of The Drunk Gambler with Erectile Dysfunction. He's an entrepreneur, a traveller, a conservationist, and a man who spent years searching for meaning in all the wrong places. After decades of alcohol, gambling, pornography, failed relationships, self-sabotage, and chasing the next escape, Tom eventually discovered that the thing he was really searching for wasn't out there, it was within himself. In this brutally honest conversation, Tom shares the mistakes, the regrets, the lessons, and the turning points that helped him stop running from himself and finally build a life worth living. We explore self-worth, loneliness, addiction, intimacy, masculinity, purpose, and why so many men spend years searching for answers everywhere except within themselves. This isn't a story about addiction, it's a story about self-worth. It's a story about finding yourself. And it's a story about discovering that no amount of success, pleasure, travel, or distraction can fix a problem that you refuse to confront. And now, let's get to the interview. Thank you so much for coming on. You do have an amazingly titled book, but for people who maybe don't recognise you, could you just give a quick introduction? And I'm quite excited to see how you introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure thing. My name's Tom Jenkins. Recently released a book, as you say, called The Drunk Gambler with Erectile Dysfunction, Searching for Something More. So I don't think there's another book titled like that, but it's sort of a journey through my life of like how I grew up. I grew up in a good background, a good family, and just made a lot of bad decisions in my teenage years and early 20s, drinking, drugs, gambling, sexual problems as well that I'm sure we'll be touching on, and then the slow journey to sort of turn it all around, and now based out in Colombia. Been living here 9 years, married to a Colombian girl for the last 5 or 6 years. We met out here. Long story on how I ended up here. I'm sure we'll come on to that. But yeah, that's sort of the basics about me.
Because when you read your story, it's remarkable how you've turned out. Because when you start reading it, you're thinking, oh, here he goes. And then you go to Colombia to actually get away from the drink and the drugs, and you settle down and you're building this amazing kind of retreat. You're looking to help other people, etc. But you did have a lot of problems when you were younger. And I think a lot of us are struggling just now with our own, finding ourselves. What were you like as a young man, like coming out of school, etc.? What started you on the slippery slope, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one because a lot of people are reading the book now, like, didn't really get to the extent of everything that was going on in my life. So I was, for the most part, just a kind, timid, shy kid, but who had an extreme lack of self confidence, an extreme lack of self worth, and an extreme lack of self control when under the substances. So for me, predominantly, it was alcohol. I wasn't an alcoholic. I was more a British style binge drinker. What that means is I could be functional Monday to Friday, wouldn't drink if I stayed in my tiny comfort zone. I'd be okay and I wouldn't be drinking. But if I went out or if I went 1 inch outside my comfort zone and it was tiny, I can't pinpoint exactly when or why or at what point, my confidence and my self worth really began to struggle. All I know is during my teenage years and as I began to drink, it's just sort of the snowball effect down. I'd use drink to cover it over. I'd do a lot of very stupid things, stealing. I'm always the guy, at the party when you're a kid, like sort of in the corner throwing up. I've woken up on street corners. I've stolen from hostels, and all of this stuff. And, it seems weird to some people because on the other side of that, most of the time I was just a kind, shy, timid kid. But yeah, those bad decisions I made just continually fed the spiral downwards. The more I drank, the worse the confidence would be. So I'd gamble to escape and I'd lose the money there. But then when you finish doing that, I'd feel worse still. And it was just a long journey down until, one big event that got me to the point where I just thought I can't continue on this path.
Because it's quite remarkable, isn't it? It's like that we are almost shaped by society to be these, like this is what's expected of you. And if you go outside of the norm, you're almost kind of ridiculed and humiliated for it. And I mean, I can remember when I started the podcast, people like lambasted me the whole time about it and made fun of it. And now, since I've managed to push myself on, it's kind of been accepted now. But I know that feeling when you want a drink to sort of hide from stuff or feel socially confident. What were you telling yourself at that time? Were you aware of this, or were you just kind of going into autopilot to hide from those feelings?
I was 100% aware. I mean, I think you push it, obviously, you push it down and you try and hide it, and you wake up in the morning and, with your mates, you all laugh about the stupid things you've done. And, don't get me wrong, sometimes we're funny. We had good times as well, but a lot of that laughter was just covering over what we've done. But from the very first time I got drunk, I think I was 13 or 14. I knew I didn't like this. And I knew when I woke up in the morning and I didn't feel great, I knew I didn't want, this isn't truly what I wanted. But the troubles, unless you get to the root cause of the problem, well, it was kind of the remedy to cover over that lack of self-confidence. And it was just easier at the time to continue with that. And, sort of the British culture, I think things have changed a little now. Younger people are turning away from more drink. Unfortunately, I think they're going to technology, TikTok and Instagram and just staring at screens. I don't know what one's actually better or worse. But, in the day, our culture, for me at least, was very much like that. You finish work on a Friday, I was functional. And what do? You just go straight to the pub. And, for me, it would end up, one of the stories I tell in my books, I was gambling as well. And I went with a mate to Cheltenham horse racing. We're meant to be staying with a friend of his. I didn't know where it was. I didn't know the person. He was in charge. He ended up in a strip club. I ended up in the stairwell of the University of Gloucester's halls of residence. I've never been to this university. I don't know where it is. I don't know how I got there, just a complete blackout. All I know is I've urinated in the corner. That's sort of dripped onto my jeans. I've lost my phone, wallet and keys. And I've just woken up on the floor with somebody kicking me to, not kicking me to hurt me, but just kicking me to say, get up and get out. What are you doing here? So, that's one of the stories, just to give a bit more detailed context. And, after that, you just feel truly awful. But when you're in that spiral and you don't have, I guess, the tools, or I haven't made that decision that now's the time to change. Well, just so many different events and stories continued like that.
And do you think that's something that a lot of men are now struggling with? It's that we use it more to hide from it. It's that question that, we've all had that mate that goes a bit crazy at parties, or we've had nights out where we've been blazing and really struggled to remember what happened. But are we now at the point where a lot of people find their own path, but it's usually shaped by parents or their qualifications or just any job they can find? And were you searching for something a bit more? Because the book is called Searching for Something More. Did you have an idea
Yeah,
at that point of what was important to you, or were you just hoping to find it?
no, I knew. I mean, I always knew I wanted more and something different. And, as I say, I come from a good background. I can't complain. I'm not a victim story. I just made some bad choices and went down some wrong routes that I had to get to the bottom of. But I knew, like, my whole family sort of has a finance background. I knew that wasn't for me. I knew the drinking wasn't for me, but sort of in the environment that I was with, and they were good people too. I don't want to just my environment, that was the problem. I'm still in
No.
touch with people today, but yeah, it was, I don't know. I never liked school. I never liked being sort of kept in a box, sit at your desk for 8 hours. Um, I've always enjoyed being outside, moving. Fortunately, I've always, my parents are sportsmen. I've always been into sport, and even in my worst times, that sort of kept me up. At least I kept moving and doing one
Mm.
positive thing. But yeah, I think a lot of young people back then and now are using drinking to cover over their lack of self confidence, their lack of direction. They're using their phones now, as he touched on, staying in, and just not socializing and not building those connections. In terms of the careers, I think the best thing somebody can do is provide, work and provide for their family, and a lot of people don't have, the fortune, to be able to, oh, I'm going to go work in my dream job or being in my dream area. And there are so many different reasons that play into this. But I think a lot of people who do have the fortune to do something different, they know they don't want to drink, gamble, drugs, stay in the work they're in, stay in the bad relationship, have the sexual problems. And that's a big reason I wrote this book. It was sort of for me. I wish I'd read this for myself when I was an 18-year-old. I'd
Mm.
have known I'm not alone and there are different options and you can get through this. But I've also written this for any other 18-year-olds, or 50-year-olds, whatever, that are going through the same thing, that are maybe making bad decisions, lost, or just looking for something else.
Because when I read like some of these like self help, I mean, I've bought hundreds of these things, and it's always do this. This will change your life. I did this, and I became super successful. And I love how you're in your book. You actually just go, I did this. I fucked up. I made this mistake. I hurt myself. I did this. I broke up with it. Like, you are completely honest, and you're not sugarcoating anything about it. What was it that you, because I do a lot of self sabotage. I do a lot of like jealousy. I struggle with intrusive thoughts. There's all sorts of things that are sort of, I know, that hold me back, not feeling worthy. And I think this is part of the reason for starting the podcast. What did you think other people had that you didn't have? Was there something you felt was missing?
It was. I think a lot of people as well, if they're brutally honest, were struggling with, who at least those around me were struggling with a lot of the same things I was. But what I was missing's, I guess, we've touched on the self confidence, but that's easy to go on. A lot of people do. Maybe a role model or somebody to look up to who is like doing something different and going down a different path to sort of the professional services 9 to 5 job, which, at the time, back in the early 2000s, was still linked to that culture of, well, on a
Mm.
Friday you go to the pub, and then, on a Saturday night we're out as well. You can throw some drugs in there. We haven't touched on that too. And, that sort of very much was the culture. And I think I was, maybe missing sort of a role model who was doing something different in a different way. But that said, even with that, at the stage I was feeling myself, I didn't have it within me to. There were plenty of role models, and I just didn't have
Yeah.
it within me to go out and search for that. So it was, I think what was missing was getting to an ultimate low to actually realize, it was a night after drink and drugs. As I say, I was functional, I could earn some money. Sometimes I could hold myself together for 6 months or so. And I've traveled, so I got away with Brazil for 2 weeks with a friend of mine, and had a story of trying cocaine for the first time there. Ended up back in a hostel room, throwing a load of stuff around, sort of like a messed up rock star with none of the glamour and all of the shame.
Mm.
Pissed a load of people off. Left the hostel the next morning, having not paid our bill for 6 days. And, this was after 2 weeks of similar behavior with drinking beforehand. And just on a flight back to London, being like, in the next few days after, I cannot continue like this. This was 2021. I'm stealing, drugs, drinking, throwing other people's stuff around the hostel room, and just getting to that point of my life has to change and I have to do something different. And I made a lot of mistakes, a lot of slip ups past that,
Mm.
and I still do, that's what I try and get across. I'm no guru, I'm nobody to tell anyone what to do. We all have our own paths, but maybe, if somebody can relate to my story, they'll learn something from it. And, that's kind of the idea.
No, I really liked the book because initially you're kind of reading it and you're kind of like, oh, you can see and you're kind of like, Jesus, I wasn't so bad. But like you said, it's great to see that other people have the feelings of not being enough, the feelings of not fitting in. And I can remember being like drinking myself to kind of fit in, or always feeling like being the joker to try to not know my place. So I crack jokes to try and make people like me. Were you telling yourself these sorts of things? Were you always having a justification in your head about why you'd smashed up the hotel room or why you had gone and tried cocaine? Or was there always something that justified it in your head?
No. I mean, it was part of, well, it's just what we do. And it's just, how
Ah,
we enjoy ourselves. There's part of that.
it's what you
There's
do the
part of, well,
weekend, one
it's,
of the boys kind of thing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's part of, well, it's my escape. But, no, ultimately deep down, I knew all the time this isn't where I want to be and I have to change. But yeah, I had to really get to that low to then go about turning things around.
Do you think that's why you didn't it took that so long? Was that the pain points were always a bit of a sore head or a bit of shame? There was never anything truly bad up to that point.
Mm, no, I mean, I think because the emotional side of a hangover or losing a load of money on like Lithuanian basketball or, whatever I'm betting on, always feels worse than the physical side. Um, so I think, no, I knew I was struggling and I knew I wasn't happy with where I was going and I knew I was very down and anxious. I was never to the point. I know, a lot of people feel a lot worse. Get to self harm or suicidal levels. I was never there, and I was never
Hmm.
anywhere near having those thoughts. But I knew, I really wasn't feeling good with myself, and I knew. As much as I tried to justify it or laugh it off, I knew I didn't want to be here.
Did you ever kind of consider it as punishment more than pleasure? That you were actually trying to have like a justification of why you weren't where you wanted to be. That you could say, "Well, it's because I like a drink," or it's because of my drinking that I can't be this type of person that I want to be. Were you trying to find a reason to hold yourself back?
I don't think so. I just think I just got so lost in it, and it was just the easy way out, and it was the escape, and I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't know how else to be. I didn't know how to be around people I didn't know. I didn't know how to be with girls, touch on these sexual experiences. I lost my virginity at 22, 23, and, all the cool kids in inverted commas or whatever were, dating at 14, 15. And I just had
Hmm.
no confidence to connect, even if I did. Who would want to be with me at a party? I'd just be like the drunk idiot. Like, you'd want to run away from me. So when it finally came to that, I had as little confidence and connection in the sexual side as I did every other area of my life. And, it was just an utter disaster. I just write about it in the book. Got back to hers, nothing worked. had to just come clean. She was 33. I was 22, 23. I always forget ages. And I just had to be, look, I have no idea what I'm doing. And yeah, I write this. I left the room. I did manage to get the condom on. Anyway, I needed to
It's an
piss. Went
achievement.
down a side street, started to piss, and wondered why no urine was coming out, and realised I still had the condom on. So it was just filling up with urine. So that was like, fortunately, nobody else was around to see that. But for myself, just looking at myself in that moment, that was just an ultimate like, oh shit, we're not good at the sexual side either, even though I already knew that.
Because that's the good thing about the book is, so even though sometimes we laugh or we feel sad for you, or you sometimes stop and go, well, I don't know that myself, or I don't know about that part. So you start sort of making the reader want to improve themselves or learn about the stuff, or they can kind of relate to you in the book. And I like that part about it. Is like I could see a lot of my younger self, that the self hatred, the depression, the inability to fit in side, and I was kind of like, it made me go, oh, I can really relate to this guy. What was your opinion about being a guy back then? Because nowadays we have this toxic masculinity bullshit with Andrew Tate and that. What do you think it meant to be a man and to be? Because we don't have the role models showing us how to do it. What was it being a man to you at that point?
I mean, I didn't even. It wasn't really a conversation back then. Now
No.
it's yeah, the big thing of what is masculinity, what's toxic, the Manosphere documentary, and all of that. But I think this was happening in the early 2000s.
We
For
just got
me,
on with it, didn't
probably,
we?
yeah,
Yeah.
2005 to 2012, like those 7 years were my bad times, and yeah, there was just no conversation, and mental health. It wasn't a big, now I think sometimes we actually go too far, and there's just like people, crying on Instagram for views and attention. Now I don't want to knock it, so much incredible progress and in the mental health space, and may it always continue, but it's almost, we've gone full circle in a lot of senses. But back then, yeah, I mean, nobody had a conversation,
Hmm.
about mental health. We'd laugh about it. We'd be like, "Oh, we're fucking messed up, aren't we?" Like, and that
Oh,
was about it. So yeah, I
you would
don't
say
know.
like one of your guys, you'd be like, ah, he's just one of the lads, or he's a character. I think that was how we accepted it. I mean,
Yeah,
the intimacy issues you mentioned the books, which you're so vulnerable about it, and it's amazing to read it that you can be so open about it, and it'll inspire somebody else who's struggling to go see a doctor, see like a nurse for advice, etc. Or like to learn about these things, because I think like sex education, it's just like what's an erection? That's how babies are made. Right, done. We don't get that side of things. How did
yeah.
how did that come out of you at the time? Because did you struggle like to that feelings, because you couldn't go and say it to a mate? How did that behavior kind of spiral out of you, like at work, with friends? Did you notice your aggression, anger? Was there any kind of negative side effects because you couldn't
I
talk about
mean,
this stuff?
yeah. I mean, it wasn't. So I hid. I mean, that was always my way of dealing. I wasn't, even in my worst like drunk times, I was never aggressive. I was never violent. I was sort of the stupid joker, the stupid idiot, the clown. The clown's the right word. And, I'd
No.
hide behind that personality. I'd hide behind the drinking behind it. I'd laugh it off the next day. Um, and yeah, and as I say, at work, of course, I had two personalities. When my first job was working in sales, and it was a great job, and I was sort of a professional guy, and I could go out and present, and I could look people in the eyes
Mhm.
doing that. And it was funny. I could connect sort of on a non-personal level, but when it became to personal, intimate levels, I just couldn't do it. And at work at the time, people had no idea what I was doing on the weekend or what I'd done before. So I turned up to the second interview after being at the American Sports Bar in London playing beer pong. I turned up hungover and I still got the job because I could. It wasn't all negative, I was functional. Maybe that didn't help me at all because I could cover things. I could put a lid on things and sort of try and lie and hide and certainly to my parents, spin and manipulate things. Obviously by the time I was working, I'd moved out, but in the sort of 15, 16, 17, when you're going down the parks, stealing a bottle of vodka from their cupboard or whatever else, well, then I'm just lying and manipulating to cover over that.
And was there a point where you kind of had like enough of success that you ever felt like yourself during these like really dark times? Was there a bit where you kind of felt, oh, that's me, or something kind of like a hobby or an interest kind of spiral? Because there's a lot of negativity in the book, like, this bad event, this happened. I mean, you have some amazing titles like, the teaching at a school and the kids calling you a posh cunt or saying that your refugee camps are like Tinder for you. There's all these amazing bits in the book that I had to reread because I was laughing so much. But a lot of it, I was kind of going, I like this guy because you're so likable, and no matter throughout the book, you're just like, I have to meet this guy. He's awesome. But what was it? Was there a moment that you felt like yourself back then, or were you always kind of chasing these highs?
I mean, I think like anyone, we all want to make a difference. And, when I was trying to do good things, as I say, I was volunteering in a school where, people have been, one of the kids had been expelled for trying to burn their last school down. So it was sort of like a school for troubled kids. And, I felt good trying to help. But then at the same time, I referenced in a book, well, what's a kid who's come up from a background that I could never imagine? How is he going to relate to me, who's just grown up in a completely different way? So that's how I got the nickname Posh Cunt in that school. And, fair enough. I didn't achieve anything helping at that school. But, when you're trying to do good, it always feels good. And, as I say, I was lucky with the sport and keeping a bit active. Even in my worst times, I was still playing some football, I was still doing different things, running and this and that. So that kept me going. And, I had good people around as well. It wasn't all bad, no role models. I want to be him. And, as I say, slowly, little by little, where you get to the point where you have to turn it round. And, the first half of the book or third of the book's like the real negative. Then there's sort of the middle third where it's sort of trying to find different paths and I keep going wrong, but at least I'm doing my best to try something different. And then there's the final third where, sort of things do begin to click into place in a very positive way. So I'm sure we'll come on to a bit of that in a bit later on.
Oh, don't you worry. I was literally like, each chapter was giving me hundreds of questions, and I was thinking, like, how could I put it all into one interview? Because what I did find was like you constantly seemed to almost self-explode when you got close to success or happiness or seeming to kind of find what you needed. Did calmness ever, like, did the comfortable or normality ever become just boring or painful to you? You seem to always want to
Yeah,
get away from it.
yeah, I think that was it as well. I was always running, I was always moving. To sort of begin to turn my life around, I ended up back in Brazil, where the first big change story happened, and now, now I'm in Colombia, which many people associate, with Pablo Escobar and cocaine and all of that, narcos. But really, it's funny, I just touch on this, but the amount of people I know who've come to Colombia and got completely clean from drinking and drugs is so much more than the other way around. Now, you go to the darker tourist parts on a Friday night, you see that side everywhere.
Yeah.
It hasn't gone away. If you look for it, you find it. But anyway, coming back to your initial question, yeah, I've always been quite an extreme guy. I've never accepted sort of the status quo, the do this and do that. And I think that's a very positive thing in itself, but it can also lead to negative things. If you're constantly running and moving from one extreme to the other, whether that's extremes going from drinking excessive amounts to, then I became a teetotal vegan. It's sort of bouncing from one side to the other. Now, I don't really drink at all. I'm happy to have a beer or two every now and then, but that's
Yeah.
as much as I go on my diet. I just try and eat healthy. But, when you're bouncing, even to get away to Brazil and then Colombia and then moving jobs and trying, I sort of I joined a cult at one point and
I was going to
got
touch on
away
that.
from that. The first girl I really thought I loved, I met her, trying to help at a refugee camp in the jungle in Calais. It was called the jungle at the time. She was a volunteer as well, I should add. She wasn't a refugee, she was a British volunteer. But, I thought this is the one and we're going to be together forever and I love her and all of this, even though I hardly even knew her. But like touching back to your initial question, I found what I thought I wanted and I couldn't be with it because I didn't have the confidence to believe that she could also love me. And I'm not sure it was even love, it was more attachment at the time because I didn't know what love was. And then, I just hit the self-destruct button and, I was just losing it inside because I knew I couldn't sustain being with a girl this good and I wasn't that good. That's how I felt, obviously I know that's not true now, I just managed to make the whole thing fall apart. And after that, turned back to drinking and drugs a little bit, kept my head above water. I knew I didn't want to go back there, but ended up in sort of some personal self-development. I don't know if I can call it a cult, because there were some good things to it, but I just got very involved trying to volunteer and recruit other people to come and be part of this organization as well. I don't want to mention the name because I do mention it in the book. You'll be able to find it there, but just to not get myself in any legal issues. But and it took me a long time struggling to get over this girl. I turned to this cult before I finally moved away and got back to South America again and Colombia again, where I managed to get my head down, find a good job, and begin to sort my life out again. But there were many problems still underneath that.
I mean, you do amazing stuff. You do a lot of volunteer work, that you raise money for charities. Then you're in a cult. Then you're doing CrossFit. Then you're drinking. You go into your gambling, and you talk about getting assaulted and then trying cocaine and like my mate, and then going into Brazilian like shanty towns and all these kind of people go bloody hell. But you traveled the world doing amazing things. Did you ever give yourself credit at the time for your resilience, for your ability to try new things, to never let these things completely destroy you, that you're always pushing yourself forward? Because that alone's a serious skill that a lot of people don't have.
I give myself the credit now, and I always tell people I never let my flame burn out. I see other people around me who have sort of, still following many of the same patterns and things, and I'd love to help. But, it seems they're a bit stuck in where they're going. But even in my worst times, as I say, I always dreamed of more. And I always felt even when I'm, on a cocaine hangover after stealing for a week and feeling worse than I've ever felt before, and with good reason, I deserve to feel bad in a way. You have to sometimes feel that pain to make that change. And even then, I knew I was going to find more. And that's kind of where I kept going on and kept going to these new things and these new extremes, because I knew I was going to find in quotes, what I was looking for. I mean, and at the end of the day, I think all we're looking for is just to sit down at the end of the day and be comfortable and be at peace with ourselves. I think, a lot of the Manosphere documentary sells it, where you have to drive the Bugatti and have five different girls around your arm, and this is everyone's dream, And I think most people know that's bullshit. I think most of us, what we're looking for is, of course, a roof over our heads, a stable meal, a purpose in our day, and just to sit down at the end of the day and just feel comfortable and good in our own skin, whilst knowing that we're all going to have highs and lows, and that's sort of the natural flow of life. But know that you're good and you can deal with whatever comes your way.
Because what is it they say, if you have to have highs and lows, because if it was just in the middle the whole time, you'd flatline and be dead.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
Because you do talk in the book about how you, like a lot of kids, you learn about sex through porn. That you spent a lot of time watching porn, and I did that a lot myself. And because the sex education being so bad, and you can't really talk to your dads about these things, we learn through like some really dodgy ways of doing it. You learn through your mate buying you your first beer when you're underage. You learn through sex through porn, etc. What did you find mixing loneliness, feelings of inadequacy with porn? How did that affect you and your sexual drive?
I had no idea at the time how it was affecting me. I think just everyone watched porn. I don't think we'd even talked about it that much, but you kind of knew everyone was doing, maybe not everyone, but 95% of people were doing the same thing. And I didn't even know it was bad. I didn't know it would be affecting how I viewed sex, how I viewed females. There's so many studies linking porn to erectile dysfunction these days. Something, as a title of the book touches on, I covered over with Cialis, a product like Viagra, for a long time, until, I eventually got to the real root of the problem and everything else and healed it naturally. But yeah, I didn't even know. But I think, like anything, when you're sat on your own staring at a screen, and I think we've all been through this, the porn you start with, well, when you first see it, it's something probably quite normal and innocent. But then, that gets boring. So, then you're watching porn with 3, 4, 5 people, and it's just like, this isn't life, this isn't connection, this isn't good. And the dopamine hit, it works in the same way to the drinking and the cocaine, chasing short-term pleasure and pushing away long-term connection, and actually finding, a real partner or somebody you want to spend your life with, or, at least forming some real relationships with the opposite sex or the same sex, and yeah, it's just a shame that that's how so many of us were spending our time back then, behind a screen watching porn.
Do you think that's still a case now, where men kind of, that we equate, like connection through by stimulation? Because we can do that, we can chat to friends on screens and stuff like that. We don't actually need to be there and speak to people or be physical with somebody or actually have a connection. We can just go on and watch two strangers, doing this or doing that, or we could order food to our house. We don't need to have connection anymore.
Yeah, it's worrying. You just need to just walk down the road and look at people in a restaurant these days. If there's a table of 4, the chance that all 4 of them are on their phone WhatsApping somebody else is pretty high. And it's that phone. I think, porn addiction is one of the biggest plagues plaguing society that we don't talk about. But I think social media addiction and phone screen time is talked about a lot more and more these days. And it has to be, because if we're sat at a table with somebody and we're just staring at our phone screen instead of actually connecting with them, that's what worries me with today's day and age. And you throw in AI and virtual reality, and maybe we're going to have these goggles, and everyone's hooked up to the meta, whatever. It's worrying, but I think a lot of people are clocked on to this, and they're clocked on, and they are turning their back. Well, still, it's incredible. Here we are. I'm in Colombia. I don't actually know where you are, but we're doing this podcast, and
In
how
Glasgow.
amazing that we connect to so many people. It's not to it's not knock it all on the head as the devil, but like anything in their life, the medicine, the benefits are in the use, the healthy use or the unhealthy use.
I mean, if there is somebody going through that, who, because you do mention, that you had used prostitutes and stuff, and that was the first thing that you'd actually said in the book, where you seem to be genuinely kind of ashamed or upset about, you didn't really want to mention it. How did that sort of sexual shame? Because I found it interesting that you could do stand-up comedy and you could go out and perform that way, but you didn't give yourself credit for attempting to perform in other ways. And I found that sort of almost that balance between the two was quite interesting, how you never saw performing in front of people and connecting with people in that way, but you put so much pressure on yourself to connect in the bedroom. Did
Yeah.
you ever kind of consider that?
Yeah, it's funny now looking back. It's I could connect with people. I could public speak, which is the opposite to most people's fears. They have
Hmm.
it the other way around. But I think because I struggle to connect on an intimate level. When you're speaking to 100 people, or doing stand-up comedy on stage, there's no intimate connection. As soon as things got intimate, as soon as I had to actually touch on, and a lot of my stand-up comedy was just self-deprecation. So I'd just be knocking myself, and I've done
Hmm.
so many stupid things and stories that I've got archives to touch on. But yeah, when it came to actually really connecting with somebody, that's when it fell apart. And the prostitution, that was when I was sober as well, because I got sober, I began to sort my life out, but something was still missing. And I hadn't, I got rid of the negative, but I hadn't sort of found what I was looking for still. And so I had a gap. And how did I end up filling part of that gap? Well, I ended up visiting massage parlors in inverted commas.
Hmm.
And I think anyone who's ever done that, and I think it happens a lot more than, obviously people don't talk about it. And I think it happens a lot more than people would think and believe. When you're walking out the door there, you just feel dirty and awful and ashamed. And, the girl in there probably doesn't want to be there. I'm all for this legal prostitution if it's a free, an open and conscious choice. But I think for most cases it's not. And
Hmm.
that the person probably doesn't want to be there. Maybe they've been forced to be there, and you're there contributing to this problem. And that was sort of the dualities of the whole thing I was dealing with the prostitution.
I mean, there are probably a lot of people who are sitting there going, "Yeah, I do use drink to sort of hold myself, like be the fun guy when I don't really fit in or feel just like a shell." People doing drugs because they're too afraid to be alone with their own thoughts. There'll be people who are using like prostitutes, like you're saying, because they don't know how to connect to girls or they don't know how to speak to people. For those who are emotionally starving, what did you find that actually started to chip away at that, give you better connection or a better feeling or just to feel more like yourself?
I mean, to begin with, it had to be that decision to that point of no more of this. Now, no more of this doesn't mean that, well, now my life's going to be great. I'm sure there are going to be hundreds of ups and downs, as there was for me, even after that decision. Here we're talking about prostitution and cults and this and that. I fell back a million times. But from that point, that decision and that commitment to myself was truly made. I have a friend who says healing is a decision. And it was a decision that I am going to turn this round. I think anyone who's drunk's had those nights where you said, I'm not going to do this anymore, but you don't really believe it deep down. When you get to that point of now, no more, that's when things began to look up. And then the second was I had to find a way, a different environment. And I ended up back in South America. I've always loved it here. I've always connected. As much as I have a lot of terrible stories here that I've touched on already, I've connected with really positive sides of the culture as well. And just being in a new environment again where I know nobody, it let me slowly piece my life and build it back together. Now, for anyone listening, going to South America is not very feasible for most people, but it can just be those, well, is this relationship I'm currently in serving me? Or is it time to change this? Do I need to start looking for a different job? Do I need to find a new place to live? Do I just need to change my diet a little, It's those little things. It doesn't have to be moving to South America. Those little changes you can make, find your passions. And then for me, as I say, I was struggling. I got rid of a lot of the negative and hadn't found the positive. And this is going to be a weird one for a lot of people, but I had heard, and the guy I was working with had talked very positively about ayahuasca. Now, ayahuasca is a psychedelic ancestral medicine, very used for thousands of years by indigenous tribes in the Amazon rainforest. Now, it sounds like a drug. I associated with it as a drug, always thought it was a drug because of my bad drug experiences, stayed away from it. But I kept on hearing more and more sort of people having amazing things to say about this. And I was feeling I sort of reached the white picket fence at one point, had a girlfriend, I was still using Cialis to cover over my erectile problems, had a good job, worked my way up to VP of marketing at a big outsourcing company, had a good apartment, was going to CrossFit, keeping myself mostly healthy, but I still felt empty inside. And one day I just thought, fuck it, I'm going to go try that ayahuasca thing. What's the worst that can happen? And I ended up all or nothing, as always, at a week-long retreat. That's actually quite common when it comes to these medicines. But it's just so hard to describe in words. I used to hate it when I'd ask people, what's ayahuasca like? Oh, it's so hard to describe. And now I've become one of those people. But I do my best. It sort of took me, when I drank ayahuasca, it's sort of like a thick tea-like brew. It's sort of in a controlled, I won't really want to add this, controlled, safe environment with 2 doctors certified in ancestral medicine. So I'm very much not just preaching, go out and drink some ayahuasca or take a psychedelic on the street, but it really helped me look at my life and relive some of my childhood memories through the place of a witness, sort of in the Eastern philosophy term. Sort of going back to visions of my past and being able to look and forgive them, seeing abstract different images and how, I could go about rebuilding things in my present and in my future and leaving the past behind. Exactly how this has happened is also almost impossible to get across in a podcast. But that experience over those 5 days was one of the hardest of my life. But it let me just look back through all my past and forgive myself and forgive others around me and start with a new perspective and start knowing that I needed to make some changes still and heal the connection and the self-confidence that was still missing inside of me. And I always dreamed of, I'd never really, say I had a girlfriend, sort of had kind of 2 kind of girlfriends in my past, but it was never anything like real and deep.
Yeah.
And that's what I always wanted. And that's something that I had to really get to the bottom of myself, why I still struggled so much to be with myself. And when I came out the ayahuasca retreat, the first thing I did was delete all dating apps on my phone and stop dating and stop trying, because I knew I had to get really within myself and be comfortable with myself. And when I found that, I knew the girl was who I was meant to be with was gonna appear, and that took 9 months of doing that until eventually she did.
Because it's a remarkable bit in the book where you kind of almost cheer when you find your person, and you talk about her so beautifully and so passionately. But because even when you found Robin Sharma's book, about and the self help books, you kind of almost made that an addiction of trying to fix it. What was it about the ceremony, taking the herbal medicine that finally broke down those barriers, that finally let you be you? Like, what was it? What did it show you about yourself? Or how did it let you make amends with yourself, with making forgiving people and that? How
Yeah,
does it do that?
it's so hard to describe, and there are so many stories of it. And there are some great documentaries. You'll find on YouTube and even Netflix these days. There's one on Ibogaine for PTSD for veterans, and it's
Because you do
it's
say in
it's
it
just
that you always ask people, and they would all say they don't know, and you would hate that answer, and you said the exact same thing in the book.
yeah.
Is it
it's
such a personal journey?
It is a personal journey, but so many people experience so many of the same things. And I say, one of the things I experienced, I say it's firstly being that witness, to be able to look back at visions and memories that you'd completely forgotten from your past, but being able to just sort of look and observe and forgive them. It's sort of looking from above as in a non-judgmental way. The other thing was, and this sounds a bit, I was a stone cold atheist my whole life. It was completely illogical to me. And in ayahuasca, and this happens to so many people with psychedelics, I could see a connection that was much bigger than myself. And it was just a sort of, it's just this greater purpose and this greater being. Now, I'm not talking about a religious sense. Maybe people will relate it to their religion, but to me, we could call this God, the universe, energy, whatever works for you. It's just this shared greater purpose and this greater faith that we're not just here for ourselves. We're here for something bigger than us, and we have to believe in something bigger than us. And finding that faith for me, faith firstly in myself, secondly in humanity, and thirdly in this greater concept, really helped to shift things around. And I think faith in humanity these days is a harder one to touch on, because we turn on the news and somebody's getting bombed left, right, and centre every day. But that's not the reality of how, if we're fortunate enough to probably be in the position of everyone listening to this podcast, that we're probably not in a zone of war and destruction. And if, me or you open our eyes tomorrow in the streets, there'll be kids playing, families smiling, dogs running, beautiful nature. And that is the environment that we're fortunate enough to have around us, and to celebrate that humanity, whilst also knowing that a lot of bad things are going on in the world. And well, how can we contribute to that, however small, just to make the world a better place? And even if that's just picking up a Coke can off the street and putting it in the trash, well, you've done your little thing. And some of us think, well, I used to be locked in it. How can I make this change? I need to, I don't know, cure cancer or stop world wars. Well, that's going to take a huge collective effort. And we all just have to do the best of the little things we have around us first to build something better.
Because there's a bit after like one of the ceremonies where you said how the ceremony it allowed you to find your voice again, to be you again. And was that part of the ceremony, that fact that it showed you that you had been taken and that you wanted to give back, that you wanted to connect, like when you found Darcy, when you decided that you were going to go plant trees, that you were going to go and do these amazing things, you wanted to help other people find themselves? Was that part of it, finding your voice, making you realize your purpose?
50% realizing my purpose, I'm realizing that there wasn't this huge mecca I had to arrive to where it's going to be healing everything, but just start. There's that famous saying, I forget who says it, if you want to heal the world, start by healing yourself. So that
Hmm.
became my purpose, and making those little changes to help make the world around me a better place. And yeah, give rather than take. And then the second side to finding my voice was all the times I wanted to say, no, I don't want to go down this route. When I was being a clown in the pub and they're saying, oh, go on, Tom, like have another drink or whatever. And when I wanted to just say, no, I don't want this because I didn't know what else to do, I'd just take it or do whatever stupid thing I didn't want to do. There was 50% of just finding that voice to say no. I think a lot of people struggle to say no, and I still do at times. Still working on that, but it's that confidence piece 50% and that purpose piece 50%.
What was it about? Was it you deciding that you were worthy enough, or how do you think that you sort of, I don't want to say work toward, but you actually materialized almost Darcy into your life. You said earlier about how you kind of, you knew, you just, it was no longer, I'm going to swipe. I know she's going to come. She'll find me when it's needed. What was it about it? And what advice would you give to very single people like myself to find that person? Because you talk about her so beautifully in the book and so positively, and how she's made such an impact on you and the great things you're doing together. But for people who haven't found their own version, what advice would you give them, not to settle, but to find the person, their person?
I'd say that faith that I touched on comes into it massively. Just trust in yourself and in the world around you. That when you become the person you want to be, or you truly are, you will attract the other person, the other half who's meant for you. Now that sounds a bit buzzwordy. So
Hmm.
to go more into detail, what did I have to do? Well, in my journey, I first had to stop drinking, gambling, and drugs. I mean, without that, I'd have never done it. Well, now I'm getting a bit lost and I'm going sideways, maybe into cults, or I've gone to prostitution. That's probably the worst thing you can do to find another partner. But begin to recognize, the patterns and the things you're doing inside you that are harming them. And then what can you do to get to the root cause of that lack of self confidence or those patterns? Now, for me, ayahuasca helped massively. For other people, it may be yoga, meditation, walking in a park. We all have our own different ways, but if you're able to sit with yourself and be with yourself and be present to the surrounding, to your environment around you, you're sort of going into more the Eastern and Buddhist side of things. I mean, meditation can play a huge role in that. And then finding your passions, I got away from that. I had no time for my passions because I was drinking and whatever else, and I'd have no energy or I'd spent all my money gambling. But, if your passion's yoga, well, dedicate more time to that and give yourself time and give yourself a break. Forgiveness as well, forgiving. And we always think of forgiveness as I forgive you, the other person, but the most important form of forgiveness comes back to ourselves. And we're all going to make mistakes. I make hundreds of mistakes still. I try and get that across in the book. Why would you listen to me? Look at all the things I've done in my past. But we're going to fall down and we're going to make mistakes. And maybe we're going to enter the wrong relationship again. And, oh, how have I ended up here again? But just, okay, well, what's there to learn from this? What's there to accept from this? And stand back up and thank the lessons, forgive the bad, look forward to the good, and have faith that you're moving in the right direction if you're making the decisions that are true to yourself and your heart.
I love that. That's a cracking answer, because like when you're reading the book, you're just like, we want you to succeed. We want you to do well. We cheer when you succeed. We cheer when you finally get happy and that you can see this transformation. I mean, something I really struggle with is regrets. When now that you're happy and you're looking back and writing the book and it's a cathartic, like transformative thing and you're kind of making peace with it, etc. Did you struggle with regret and think, oh, that was years wasted? Because you do mention how those incidents made you who you are. So to change them would have changed you. Do you ever regret any of it? Is there any parts of it you really struggle with?
I mean, I think it's just natural that we look back and have that regret sometimes, and I still do, but deep down, I know it all had to happen how it happened to learn the lessons that I had. Now, some of the things that I did that hurt other people, it's easy to say, well, I'd love to go back and change it, but I can't. And I had to live that path and do those things and go through that journey to get to where I am now. Now, I don't think it's necessary to do that. I think plenty of people learn without going to such extremes, but that was my life and that's what I did. So it's been done now, and what good can it do going back there and thinking, well, why did I do that? Learn, forgive, learn the lesson, and move forward with faith, knowing that I'm in a stronger place today.
I mean, a big part I liked about the book was where you openly admitted that where you fucked up again, or you made a similar mistake, or you slipped back, or I love where you kind of said, I go like round in a circle, then I go off to the square, then I'm up in this corner, and you're openly admit that you did make mistakes and you go too far one end, or you would kind of become addictive to try fix yourself or help yourself, and then you slip back, and it's the honesty in the book. It's such a self, and it's your story is amazing, but we can see ourselves in you. But for those people who are thinking, yeah, but I would like to do that, but I always slip back. What did you find out about getting back on the horse after you've fallen off, after you've made a mistake? Was there anything that you found was good to not dwell on it, but to learn from it and get back and carry on?
For me, exercise has always been a center that I've had, and just getting outside and just going for a walk. I grew up in the countryside, and just being with nature and getting some exercise in was always something. But I think the longer I went on, falling back doesn't have to be a reason to go back to square one and where you are before. We all fall down. Use classic the baby example, learning to walk.
Yeah.
Well, to begin with, they fall down 1,000 times, and then by the end, it's just every now and then they're walking fine. And it's just that it doesn't. You don't have to go back to square one. Okay, I fucked up again. I've done it again. This hurts. This is painful, but be with it. Because I think as well, we also try and run from the hurt, cover it over. I drink, I'll get in, and my relationship's just ended. I'll get on the rebound and get in another relationship. Oh shit, I don't like this job. Well, let's just jump to another job. I don't like that either. Without truly sitting down, breathing, and accepting where we are and feeling the hurt, processing it. There's the Buddhist phrase, pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice. And it's important sometimes to feel that hurt, but we don't have to stay there for 2 years, 5 years, going over the suffering again and again and again.
Do you know, like the person that you read in the book at the start is certainly not the person who would have that level of depth that you have now. And it's amazing to see this kind of depth, this growth that you have, the understanding. And I think that's why your book will help a lot of people is, that you do admit you made a lot of mistakes, that, you're maybe going through these things now. This is how I did it, but this is how I came out of it. And you give a lot of tips in the book about how people can find it themselves. But when you do look into this now, and you think back that you did this, you were fighting and getting beaten up in nightclubs, or you were getting robbed or found in alleyways drunk and that. Does it normal life ever feel flat? Do you miss the excitement?
I mean, I don't get me wrong, because sometimes I talked about like the place in Medellin near where I'm based, where on a Friday night you'll find the drinking and the drugs is called Poblado. I know it also has all the best restaurants. So, and I do enjoy, who doesn't enjoy great food? So go down with my wife sometimes. And I'm not sure, maybe they're on a Friday night. I'm not sure it ever goes away of like when we leave at 9 o'clock. Oh, be fun just to go and get completely fucked up tonight. It's so easy. It's right there in front of me.
Yeah.
But I just know, like, I know where it ends up and I know where I am now. And I have like a higher vision and a higher purpose to throw out a couple of buzzwords. I'm so happy, like, with my wife now. There's nobody on this planet I could love more. Have a natural reserve where we're planting thousands of trees. Working still part time in sort of a sales consultancy role that is flexible and pays me well. And I've just built where I'm filming this from. We've just finished building a country house, beautiful in natural wood, and growing all
Awesome.
our own food down here now. So it's been all the struggle I had to go through to get to where I am now. And if you're struggling, so was I and so many others, and you're not alone. And there are so many groups and communities and books and resources and techniques and tools. We've talked about a lot on this podcast that you can use to get over it. And, if I can and if anyone else can, so can you. I promise you that.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the transformation. When you read the book to now, you would not imagine this sort of grounded person that you are now, this happy version of yourself. What was it, do you think, that Darcy saw in you back, because you couldn't see it yourself? Did like love heal you, or did you healing yourself and coming to terms with that allow you to find love?
I think it has to come from within one. Finding another partner, to finding somebody else or something outside yourself to cure and heal the love that's missing inside yourself will never work. Now it feels good, it feels nice at times, but it has to come from within first. And I think, because I always wanted to make a difference. And as I say, who doesn't? We all want to make a difference. But I think by that time, when I was eating better, training better, living better, leaving the negative vices behind, I changed my job, I changed my living environment. I began, following my passions more, getting outside more. And with the forgiveness that I was feeling every day after the ayahuasca experience, and the trust and the faith that I was building, well, all that potential that just felt so locked up before began to expand and be released out. And I'm sure she felt that in me, and I felt that in her. And just things locked together. And look, we still have, like any couple in the world, our fair share of fights, problems, insecurities, anxieties. There's always a million more mountains to climb, and it's part of it. And I never, I make there's so many mistakes every day still. I never want to preach to anyone, and we're all just here doing the best we can. And that's all we're trying to do, each and every one of us.
I love it. I love it. I mean, is that why you wanted to create something? You were fed up of destroying things, or kind of not being part of something that you wanted to give something that would benefit the future generations, potential kids, that you wanted to help the country that given back to you, that you wanted to just leave a legacy?
Yeah, I think so. I've always loved being outside. I've loved regenerative agriculture. It's something that I've learned over the last few years. And I've always, been somebody who's more outside than inside. So building a natural building or creating a natural reserve and planting trees and learning how to do it from real experts on a huge scale just really excited me. And from a selfish point of view, it's beautiful to go there and to be part of it, and to get to do what I love. And I think we should never forget that. It's great. And then on the bigger macro level, well, at the same time, it's also giving back to the world and the planet and the environment and creating employment. That's fantastic too at the same time.
So imagine you have somebody just now who has listened and went, bloody hell, okay, I want that. But I like a drink. I like being one of the lads. I do a couple lines of coke, and I get in trouble on that. But I'm not really that. I'm not that bad, or somebody who finds, who's maybe hungover and they find your book and it's, they go, oh, that's a cool title, and they start reading it. What would you want them to do? How would you want them to use the book or to start changing themselves? Like, say they read it and go, yeah, I want to change. I want to be like this. How do you want them to
Yeah,
use
I
the
mean,
book?
yeah, I think, firstly, people enjoy having a few drinks and on a Friday night and doing it in a good way, or maybe, gambling every now and then, or, just for a bit of fun at very like normal, manageable levels. Great. Like, I don't want to demonize anything. There's a lot of positives that come from that. I'd say it's more, speaking to the people who know that what they're doing isn't healthy and they want to change. That's probably who this more speaks to. And if you want to change and you relate to what's going on, maybe my book can help you, but there are hundreds of other books out there as well. And begin to, make a decision, get clear on what you truly want with your life and where you want to go. And, write it down if you need to, have it present every morning so you don't slip up into the habits that you want to get away from. And,
Mhm.
try and find your passions and your purpose. It doesn't happen immediately. It took me 31 years of fucking everything up before I got there, and I never stopped searching. I've been to every extreme there is, basically. So don't get impatient as well. I am still can be highly impatient, but some things take time, and just keep working at it. And the big changes happen after 1,000 little changes. So just keep trying to make those little changes every day. And if you're enjoying your current life and you're on the right path, keep going forwards. Keep going forwards too.
'Cause I think you did say that in the book was where you needed to decide you want to change. You can't change anybody. Like if somebody is worried about a friend or a brother or a mate or whatever, what would you say to them? Can you help somebody or do they need to decide themselves?
I mean, I think you can influence, or you can be an inspiration or a role model to people. It's very difficult to go into somebody's room. You need to change and point the finger there. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes there is a need for that. So you do have to sit somebody down and look, what are you doing? But unless they're truly open and wanting to do this, it may not get that far. So, it's back to that where if you want to change the world, first change yourself, be an inspiration, a role model, try and pick people up. If you have to go and have that frank conversation of, look, what you're doing, it is still worth having in some environments, of course, but ultimately you can't change anyone else. The change has to come first from within.
And do you find it funny that now that you didn't have a role model growing up, but you're now going to become a role model to help people? And in the sense that your self improvement style, whereas you're not talking from up here, out in the clouds saying, I'm the guru, this is what you need to do. You're going, hey, I fucked up. I'm doing the stupid shit with you, but I'll show you how you can get happy again or how you can find yourself. How do you find now becoming that person that you needed back then?
I don't know. I mean, I've never been asked that before. It's a good question. I'm just comfortable with who I am today while still having my fair share of anxiety and doubt here or there. But because I'm comfortable with who I am, well, if there's somebody I can help, great. And if there's not, well, what can I do? And I just try and live as good as I can, and make a difference where I can. And I don't really see myself as a role model or anything else. And but if people look up to me and learn from me in a positive way, well, I accept that too. So fantastic.
No, because you're definitely going to get a lot of fans for reading the book who are going to think Yeah, I like this guy. I want to know more about him. I want to find out about him. I mean, what's next? Are you planning? You talk in the book about wanting to do retreats and taking people and getting them into like the herbal medicines and stuff. But how can you take this further? What's the kind of like the mission for this, or is this just to kind of make peace with yourself and put the story out and hope it helps somebody?
Yeah, a bit of both. Yeah, wrote the book for myself as much for anyone else, but thinking, well, if somebody can relate to my story and learn something from it, fantastic. I have no attachment to the book becoming a New York Times bestseller. I'd love it to, if it
Hmm.
can be fantastic. But if only a few people read it and they gain benefit from it too, I'm happy with that too. So I don't know. I just move forward each day. I said I'd never write another book, and now I have. I'm feeling the want to write another book. More sort of a creative book, not based on my life, but
No.
sort of more fiction, but still following the same themes. Anyway, that'll be a work in progress for another year or so.
Well, we'll get you.
But you know,
We'll get you on the show when you get ready to put that out.
but other than that, just keep. Still don't have. We still don't have kids. That'll probably happen someday soon. Still can't keep planting trees. Still form good relationships around me, and just I don't know, little by little, just try and do the best I can.
And if you think back to that young version of yourself, and now the guy that's sitting here smiling, saying, "I love this woman to death." We're talking of having kids. Creating this now. Can you imagine that back then? Because like I'm going through a bit of a period where I don't feel like I fit in. I've got the good job, the good car, all that, and I'm like, yeah, there must be more than this. Is
Yeah,
that the like the Aerosmith song? Is it the journey, not the destination?
yeah, I'd say completely that. And in my worst times, I probably could have never imagined this, but at the same time, there was always that flame here. And, you've got this podcast that's no doubt helping a load of people at the same time, too, in exactly the same way to my book is in a different way. So just keep going and doing the best you can and forgiving and smiling and accepting that you'll continue to fuck up like anyone else and move forwards when you do.
I mean, I'm always gutted when I've used up so much of your time, but I would love to have you on again, and because there's so many areas we haven't even touched on, and I've used up over an hour of your time. But what would you want people to take from this? Until we can do like later on and do stuff for that. What would you want people to remember about this in terms of the book, your story, potential, anything and everything? What would you want them as to take from this as a message?
Well, I think for people, who are already on their path and going where they want to go, hopefully they just enjoy the read and like my story. And maybe if there's one or two things they can take from it, brilliant. But I think, yeah, more for the people who are sort of lost and making the bad decisions that I was back in the day, to be able to look and to realize you're not alone. There is a way out, there is a way forward, and it's just about finding your own way and forgiving the bad and accepting things that happen, not trying to be perfect, and just move forwards as best you can, and don't lose that flame, don't lose that light, because if you make the decisions that are true to yourself and your heart, eventually you'll get where you want to go.
It's a damn good read, and it's a damn good learning story, and a lot of good things to take. Before we get to the final question, why should people buy a copy of the book? Despite that, not just to help you and make you, a number one best-selling author, etc. Why, what's the best sales pitch for people to pick up a copy of your book?
I just think it's a truly honest, brutally honest story that goes to the core of a lot of things that most people wouldn't touch on, and especially the sexual side, because I think there are a lot of incredible books out there on drinking, drugs, and gambling. And there are also books out there on the sexual struggles and the embarrassment and the shame as well. But just something that tackles all those four together and then goes on to the like slow, painful, mistake-ridden journey to sort of try and turn it round and find a life of meaning. I'd say that's it. I mean, I forget the quote the guy I work with made about the book. He's a great mate of mine still, and I'll give you the most transparent book I've ever read about modern struggles with masculinity. Tom openly discusses themes that no one else is talking about, but lots of men are going through. And I think for me, that was Mikey's an incredible guy. We've known each other 18 years. And for me, that quote really meant something to me. So I'll leave that one.
I love it. 'Cause I'm actually delighted to see the you that was in that book to the you that's now. It's so heartwarming, and I am super proud of the journey, and you should be thoroughly pleased to how I'm proud of yourself. And I don't think you give yourself enough credit for people who do want to, get in touch to find out about this, and do see the work you're doing, and just to kind of find their own path and get in touch, etc. How can they keep in touch with this amazing work you're doing?
Yeah, so if you the book's available on Amazon, so The Drunk Gambler with Erectile Dysfunction, Searching for Something More, Tom Jenkins. And if you want to get in touch with me, my website is thedrunkgambler.com. So go there. There's my email or a contact me form, I forget. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, doubts, or whatever you want to say, and I'll be delighted to hear from you.
Well, that's it for another week, and thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.